So here is video for notes 3. Use this for questions 22 through 35 on your study guide, and those need to be done by Monday, April 13th before midnight. So we are sticking with parties here. The video before this one had a good intro to them as far as a linkage institution. Remember, this is a big way of how the people get connected to the government is through parties. And we looked at it's hard to keep these big Democratic and Republican parties together in the United States. They're going to try to mobilize voters as best they can. But because we have a proportional system, it really lends itself well to having a two-party system. And so we'll get back to some third-party things here in these notes. I did want to go back and just take a look at our last presidential election from almost 4 years ago now. So as this election year goes on, they're going to show maps like this. And one of the questions on your study guide I know is about, regional dominance. Where do Democrats get their votes from and where do Republicans get their votes from? Looking at this map, you can see, I would say, for sure, the South is a deeply, deeply Republican voting area. And here in these notes, we're going to get to why that started to flip and when that started to flip. But I would definitely put the South, and you can see Democrats clean up along the coasts, East Coast, West Coast, and there's a few states in the middle. So if you want to look at the map as a whole like that, that's how it looks. Now, if you want to break it down by county, you can see here, and the darker red it is, the more deeply, like the bigger percentage it went for Trump. The darker blue, the deeper percentage that Clinton won. If it's pink, it means it was pretty dang close. If it's super light blue, it was pretty dang close. Here's Sedgwick County, was fairly close. Butler's a little bit darker, but not as dark as, Western Kansas. Going back to, why did a Democrat not even run in that District 1 of Western Kansas? Well, that's why. Look how red it is. So if you want to break it down by county, if you look at this across the United States, you could even say, well, we still have that urban and rural split, right? Democrats are cleaning up in the urban areas, the big cities, whereas it's very deeply Republican in the more spread out rural areas where there are not a big population. So yeah, you see a lot more red on this map, but a lot more people live in the blue areas. And so it can be a little bit misleading unless you know what you're looking at. Weirdly enough, the one state that's actually flip-flop from that is Alaska, whereas this is where most of the people live in Alaska, as Anchorage and Fairbanks and Juneau, and it's red, and the very spread out parts are blue. But that is not the case for the rest of the United States. All right, so for the study guide there, yeah, you got South and rural areas for Republicans, urban and coasts a lot of times for the Democrats there. What you're going to see them talk about a lot this year in 2020 being an election year is what states are Trump and Biden going to be going for. So similar to the map that we just saw, the darker red it is, the easier Trump won it, right? Trump's not sitting there worrying about, basically anything that is these dark red like Oklahoma or Arkansas, even these next level of dark ones, like where Kansas is. Kansas is really not in play to go for anybody but Trump. Texas, on the other hand, I know it's the same color as Kansas, but I would be careful about Texas here in the next few years. All right, but really, what you're going to see Trump and Biden talk about a lot is the quote unquote swing states, and we'll talk more about those later. But, if you look at the very, very pinkish, the lightest ones here versus also the lightest blue ones here, how many electors, how many states did Trump just barely win? You got Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, right? And then you had like one up here in Maine, and then the 6 over here in Utah, and the 11 in Arizona. He barely won those states, and that pushed it over the edge to getting a win. This right here pretty much is where the election is going to be won or lost. The Rust Belt, they call it. Right? Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and throw Minnesota in there too. This is where things could sway one way or the other, along with Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. That's where people are going to be really focusing on. And on the flip side, yeah, Clinton just barely won some too, but there's a bigger margin for error for Democrats because, Clinton only barely won 50, whereas Trump just barely won 108. But if you want to add these two numbers together, that's 150. I mean, that's, quite a bit of electoral votes out there that they're going to be vying for. Kansas, we're not that big a deal because we're pretty dang sure it's going to go for Trump, and we're only worth 6 points. These are a bigger deal. So be looking for that as the year goes on. This is what Kansas looks like as far as county goes, right? Again, darker red, the more Trump it was. Only 2 counties went for Hillary Clinton. Wyandotte County, close to Mississippi, or sorry, Kansas City here, and then Douglas County, I believe this one is, where Lawrence is. Okay, and then you have here's Riley County with Manhattan, just barely won by Trump, and Harvey and Sedgwick were close. Butler's a little darker, but okay. And then again here, if you want to look at it like this, as far as where the population lives and how blue it is versus how dark it is where the population is not. So again, very urban/rural split there. All right, so what parties are going for all the time is to try to get voters, and maybe they're trying to pull from independents, maybe they're trying to pull from the other party. Just hold on, it'll get more fair. All right, let's say I am not a fan of K-State, but then I totally switch, right? And actually, oh, nope, I hate KU now. That is called realignment. I switched parties. All right, so if I switch from, I was a Republican, didn't like something about it, I'm flipping over and I'm voting for Democrats, or I'm joining the Democratic Party, or vice versa, that is realignment. All right, there's also de-alignment, as in, well, neither party's doing it for me, so I'm getting away from both. And there is a trend here that you could argue where parties are getting less important to voters in general because, all right, independent, as we will see, is actually the #1 party affiliation right now. People are joining up Democrats, Republicans less and less and saying, I kind of want to be independent. Now, one thing AP wants us to talk about is every so often in the United States, there is an election, a presidential election year, where some group of Americans that are very significant, so probably in the millions of Americans, one way or the other, switch parties. This is the realigning. We just said realignment, switching parties. 1932 is a really good example of that involving African Americans. Going back to the 1800s, right? Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. It was the Republican Party that, fought the war for the North, that turned it into more of a war about slavery. It was always about slavery. Don't let people tell you it wasn't. But when the Emancipation Proclamation came down, it became about freedom as well. And yes, Lincoln was Republican. The Northern senators that pushed the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments through were Republicans. So yes, if you hear people say today, oh, the Republican Party is the one that freed the slaves and, the South, they were full of KKK. And yeah, that is true 150 years ago, but it's also really flip-flopped, all right? And when that started happening was 1932. So basically from 1864 until 1932, for 70 years, African Americans voted Republican. They just were Republicans. All right. But 4 different pieces of criteria have to happen for a group of people, in this case African Americans. They are totally going to flip-flop. They're going to jump from voting Republican to start voting Democrat for the first time. The #1 piece of criteria is that some kind of major, huge crisis has to happen. In this case, it's the Great Depression. It's the stock market crash in 1929, right? The whole country's losing money. Everybody's poor. Well, guess who else is really poor most of the time? African Americans who had no rights and couldn't own land still in the southern states and were basically getting dumped on institutionally in all kinds of different ways. Well, right, when the Republicans basically, and Hoover, remember Hoover got the blame for the stock market crash and the Great Depression. Not totally his fault, but he didn't do much to fix it. He's like, just wait it out. It's a hiccup. Things will get better. Just believe in the system. Capitalism. Hey, we got this. And then it just didn't get better, right? So some big crisis has to happen to put the idea in people's heads that, hey, my party's not exactly rising to the challenge here. The Republicans really didn't during the stock market crash in the Great Depression. And then the other party, in this case Democrats and FDR, come in and do something about the crisis and bring new issues and have a new platform and respond to it. And so this is really what the whole New Deal is. And since it sure seemed like for the first time that, not for the first time, but in this case for sure, the Democratic Party was the one that was going to be helping out poor people, giving out the handouts, providing the government jobs for them, fixing the banking system, whatever it is, African Americans are like, hey, well, maybe we should start thinking about voting for them. And so then voters start changing their long-standing allegiances. Well, I was a Republican, but man, I got to put food on the table. I got to get a job. I got to go do whatever I can. And then they start switching sides. So 1932 was when African Americans start voting Democrat for the first time. And what happens is, with this new group of people jumping ship from one party to the next, one party becomes dominant. And yeah, FDR gets elected as president 4 times. And the Democrats control all 3 parts of the government, Congress and the presidency, House and Senate, for a long period of time. And Republicans were left wondering what the heck happened and what do we do now and how do we get voters back? And their response is going to be, well, we're not going to get African Americans back, it didn't seem like. So maybe we should start trying to get white Southerners on our side. And that's what they'll start to do. But 1932, and these 4 pieces of criteria is an example of what happens, right, when there's a big realigning election. So here is what the South looked like starting in 1932. It still totally voted Democrat, still totally went for FDR for the next 4 election cycles, right? These were the 4 times that FDR got elected. He won all these states every single time. This got nicknamed, even going back farther than this, back to the 1800s, this was nicknamed the Solid South. Democrats did not worry about these in presidential elections. They just assumed, we got this, we got it, all right? We don't have to worry about this. These are, working men and farmers, and we've represented those people forever. Throw race relations out to the side. We represent their interests economically. It's a working man's party. We got this, all right? But Republicans, knowing they're not going to get those African American votes back, start saying, hey, maybe we should start focusing on other issues, right? Maybe let's not focus on the economics. The South is a working man's thing, but they're also racist. So, when the civil rights stuff comes down the pipe, Republicans are going to be like, hey, maybe the civil rights thing's not a good idea. Maybe you should vote for us. Okay? So 1948 is when things start to flip-flop. You have Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina all jump ship, and a new third party gets started called the Dixiecrats. This is basically a direct response, like it says, to President Truman integrating the military. And, there's signs of the civil rights thing coming down the pipe, and the Democratic Party is going, hey, we need to listen to what African Americans are telling us because they're now a big part of our voting pool. We need to respond to them. All right, 1952, all of a sudden it's 50-50. All right, some states start going Republican. Eisenhower was popular in a lot of places as a Republican candidate. Okay, also, like it says, we have a lot of northern older people start moving south to retire, especially into Florida and Texas. All right, and so you're starting to see the switch happen. All right, 56 is the second Eisenhower term, about the same, still 50-50. 1960, Kennedy wins a few more with his popularity, and he won Texas because Johnson was his vice president, and he's from there. All right, and then 1964 happens, and remember, this is the heart of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Act gets signed. Johnson helps push it through, even though JFK had been assassinated about a year and a half earlier. And this is when civil rights really starts getting supplanted, and legislation starts coming down the pipe. And you see the Deep South basically says, nope. All right, and then 68 and 72, Nixon wins all the South, both times. Civil rights has shifted, all right? They started focused, like it says, on social and cultural issues, right? Civil rights, abortion, marriage, evolution, religious type stuff. Reagan will continue to do that through the 80s, and through social issues and just the sense that the South was getting left behind morally, culturally, in a lot of ways, and playing to their Christianity, they start getting it. Okay? Now, 76 is the weird year here, but Carter comes in and wins a bunch of this, but this is mostly because people felt betrayed by Nixon and the Republican Party after Watergate. That's what that is. Reagan comes in and then it's right back to the other way in 1980. Georgia only went Democrat because Jimmy Carter is from there. Otherwise, no. All right. Here's Reagan in 84, Bush in 88. 92, Clinton is from Arkansas. Democrats are probably smart to pick a Southerner. Also, Ross Perot comes in and splits the Republican vote. All right, but then 96, Clinton's second term is close, and then Bush's 2 years. All right, and then you have these other swing states start coming into the mix with Obama, but for the most part, you see it's still Republican. All right, so on your study guide, the realigning election of 32, well, when African Americans start voting Democrat, that is a big shift that made the Democratic Party start paying attention to what, African Americans were saying, and the South jumped off board because of that. All right. Now, if you look here, here's the Senate throughout the years, and obviously blue was controlled by Democrats and red was controlled by Republicans. This little tiny middle column here is who was president, and here is the House. Now, divided government. Remember that definition is when one party controls the White House, but at least one part of Congress or both is controlled by somebody else. That doesn't happen all that often, but it happened quite a bit, right? There's not a ton of times here where you have red, 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 or blue, 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 right? It really hasn't been that often, and so basically we've had to have the parties work together. But the parties are working together less and less and less lately. But here's what divided government is. We haven't had it. I mean, we've had divided government more often than we've had totally aligned government. Going back to the de-alignment thing, right? Look how here's your affiliations up here. And I know this is getting old, 8 years ago, but this has still continued to be the trend ever since then. The number of Americans saying, nope, I'm independent, has outgrown how many are Democrats and how many are Republicans. Right, so people are de-aligning from both parties, saying, I kind of want to be on my own and just choose, instead of really being affiliated with you and getting all the mail and really being a part of the party. Okay? Now, polarization, so you remember, if you're polarized, you're not very close together, right? And so as you see, as the years have gone on, right, how often things are in the middle, right? 94, more things are here working together. 2004, a little less here, but now 2014, you can see the median gap is growing. In other words, the parties are working together less often, right? More ideological consistency. It is not that the parties ideologically are growing farther apart. I don't want to make it sound like Republicans are getting more extreme. Like if you visualize that spectrum, they're going farther right and Democrats are going farther left. It's not necessarily that they're going farther as a party. They're staying where they're at on the spectrum, but the people within those parties are not coming to the middle to work together. So less middle ground, less coalitions, less groups, right? Less working together. It's not that they're growing farther apart on the spectrum. They're just not working together. And why? Well, media pressures, right? There's so much media covering every little thing that a House rep or a senator does all the time. If I cross the aisle and go work with the other side, some people are going to applaud that, but there's also going to be a ton of media outlets and internet websites and things that are going to go, oh, what a traitor. How dare you? Why are you working with the enemy? And when the media is always spinning it like that and people are reading that stuff, right, you get less credit for actually working with the other side. Lobbying, we'll talk more about in the next notes one when it comes to interest groups, because that's what they do. Lobbying is basically sending people to Washington and schmoozing with lawmakers, for lack of a better word, right? Just trying to persuade them in whatever way you can. sometimes pretty shady ways, right? And then, well, it's hard to get to Washington, D.C. without owing favors to people. And I don't mean favors as in shady way, I mean favors as in votes for laws. I mean, shoot, if I take, you know, if I take $500,000 from, the NRA, they expect me when I get elected to vote, for gun rights. Pretty simple, right? And if I don't, well, okay, when I'm trying to get her reelected in 2, 4, 6 years or whatever, then they're not going to give me the money. And I got to get it from somewhere. So it is hard to get to DC without owing a ton of favors about who gave you millions and millions of dollars. That's just the way the system works as of right now. So polarization, right, leads to gridlock, which just means that fewer things get done, right? If we're not working together, so right now, Democrats control the House, Republicans control the Senate, and then you have a Republican as president. Well, if the House passes something with a majority of Democrats, the Senate's going to try to change it. And if they don't, and it gets to Trump's desk, he's probably going to veto it because he's probably not going to like it. So what's really getting passed unless you get support from both sides? It's only when emergencies happen. Even getting the stimulus passed in the last couple of days, for the coronavirus thing to families, it got delayed and it got changed. And, the media was saying the whole time, well, Republicans are the bad guys in this. No, Democrats are the bad guys in this because they're delaying it. And it's like, well, what they offered was crap. And back and forth and back and forth. And it took a while to get even emergency funds pushed through that everybody agrees that Americans need. It's just that, what does that look like? All right, who gets what? Is there also a tax cut? Is it for rich Americans? Is it for lower class Americans? Is it for the middle class? Is it because you had a tax, return in the past year? Okay, so that was gridlock, as you saw. Now, we did get it passed, but it took a while. And it took a lot of media pressure, and it took Americans getting upset to do it. All right, to end this here, third parties, I don't know, we might have said this before, I can't remember in class, but third parties are like bees, right? They fly in, they sting once, and then they die. All right, bee stings, it dies. Same thing with third parties. But here's the thing, the reason they die, right, is because Democrats and Republicans cannot afford to lose votes to a third party. Right? It's a winner-take-all system. If the Green Party is over here stealing votes from one of the other two dominant parties, from Democrats or Republicans, well, they're both on the left side of the spectrum, so they're going to steal it from Democrats. And Democrats can't afford to let that happen. So they have to start talking to Green Party members and saying, okay, what do you care about? Oh, you care about the environment, you care about, peace and, whatever else is in the Green Party platform. Then they have to make those issues be a priority for their party too, right? So while they're alive, though, they fly around and they pollinate new ideas, right? They make the bigger parties cater to what they care about because they can't lose voters to them, all right? So as they sting, specific issues or voices of people rarely heard get brought to the forefront. So third parties definitely have a function, is what I'm saying. It's not pointless to start a new party necessarily. You know, if you do win a few states or you get a House member elected or something, fantastic. But the reality is third parties don't really have staying power because the other two parties are going to gobble them up. They're going to absorb them. All right. Also, it's a safe way for people to voice their discontent, right? Instead of, resorting to, I don't know, protests or violence or, government shenanigans or whatever it might be, right? It's a way for people to go to the ballot box and actually check a box and say, hey, I know my third party's not going to win, but at least there's somebody out there representing me. Right? I feel represented. There's an outlet for my anger, for what I care about on issues, and that is good. All right. They also get more people involved and more people voting, right? And they make Democrats and Republicans clarify their positions on certain stances, right? So they do serve these functions and they're good to have. It's just because of our system, they don't last. All right. Maybe if we had a proportional system, but we don't. All right. So other reasons of why they don't last, like we said, proportional system. Also, here, pretty much every debate that you're going to have, for most likely, this is not for sure, but in the next however many months in 2020, you're probably going to see some debates. You're going to see debates between Biden and Trump. Now, is there going to be a third party at those debates from the Libertarian Party, from the Green Party? Probably not, unless they're really making some headway. Here you see it was just Al Gore and George W. Bush in 2000, right? There was no, the Green Party, Ralph Nader actually won and stole a bunch of votes from Gore, and that's a big reason why Bush won in 2000. But you don't see Ralph Nader sitting here at this debate, all right? You're not automatically in it. And if you can't be on TV, if you don't have the money, if you don't have the exposure, people aren't going to know as much about you. So they're at a disadvantage in those ways too, just getting their message out there and what they're about. All right. Also, they're not automatically on the ballot, and it costs money to get on the ballot in every state. You know, every state runs their own elections. We're not just automatically putting you on there. You got to be legit, and you got to pay a fee, and that can be hard for third parties to raise enough money to do that. All right. And again, going back to the issue thing, they can't afford to lose votes, so they'll gobble them up. So, I think that is it for this set of notes. All right, be looking for number 4, but remember, get these done by the 13th, which I believe is a Monday, right, before midnight on that day. All right, continue to take care of yourselves.